Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about all things Unreal Engine and also black market sushi carousels. Good to see you all. As always, we're your hosts. My name is Alex.
And I'm Jacob. It's great to be back on the podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode. I'm sure make sure to like, share, comments. We got some really great comments coming in for some of our past episodes. It's really exciting to see folks enjoy it, and we apologize that we aren't making content faster. I know that's the name of the game here, but we focus on quality instead of quantity over here at Unreal Engine, the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast. Unintentionally, but maybe it's true. Maybe it's true.
How are you, Jacob, in general?
It's been a crazy few months, but been traveling a little bit. I got back from GDC, and then I thought, oh well, I'm done traveling, and then traveled a bit more, and it's just been a kind of a nonstop whirlwind, to be honest. But I can't complain. Those real-time graphics ain't gonna render themselves. So how about you, Alex? How have you been?
It's pretty good. Also traveling as well. Been back and forth to Austin a few times, preparing for a big conference in New York City on Monday. And then we'll be back to Austin and then over to LA for an event called The Next Stage, where we'll be showing some Unreal Engine theater stuff. It's a big theater conference thing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's jump into it. What's up? What's been going on in Unreal Universe?
Well, I think everyone's feeling pretty excited about 5.2 moving pretty quickly from a couple previews to a final release. And we've talked a little bit about what we were excited about based on the GDC announcements, but now a lot of this stuff is in everyone's hands. I was showing off at the top of the podcast for anyone who sees the video. The MetaHuman machine learning deformer stuff is crazy, like running in real time. Mind you, I'm on a pretty beefy computer, but it's 120 frames a second real time. You see muscles, you see clothes, you see all sorts of body flexing stuff that is really phenomenal.
Yeah, I think we spoke a little bit about some of the ML deformer stuff last episode, but it's just still insane to see the results and now having it in our hands and knowing, oh yeah, this is real. It's cool to have your hands on this stuff, and it's always exciting when they release these examples. They're very good about releasing a lot of examples and making sure anything they show, there's no smoke and mirrors, and that's always great. But I'm really excited about this kind of technology in the engine. I think like we mentioned last time we spoke on the podcast, that kind of, it's just fascinating to see how many different features are in the engine, and also kind of the new domains and the new types of activities or actions that you can take in the engine. I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who doesn't know, by the way, because I have been asked this more times than I have expected to, and whenever you want to see the latest samples available download for Unreal Engine, it's just in the Epic Launcher. There's a tab called Samples, and that's where if you were to go there right now, you would see, the newest UE feature sample is ML Deformer sample, and that's where you also find the MetaHuman sample, the Matrix City sample, a car configurator, an ICVFX thing. All sorts of great starter projects in there to get your feet wet.
Yeah, I miss the I don't really miss the days of hunting through the marketplace for random examples, but it is cool to see how much awesome content they're releasing. And you mentioned that also the driving demo from GDC was going to be released soon. Is that still true?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'd love for it to release. I bet there's a bit of a issue with Rivian from a licensing perspective. Yeah, I would imagine, because it's their actual very accurate design of their vehicle. But I would hope that you replace that Rivian car with maybe a souped up version of the car in the automotive template, and leave all the procedural stuff and leave all the great little puddle splashes and deformed tires. And I think a lot of people would be thrilled to play around in that sample.
Yeah, I mean, just the geometry scripting and procedural toolkit stuff in there would be fascinating to see. I mean, that's, I think we spoke about that as well, but yeah, that's one of the most exciting tools for me in the engine right now. Just the kind of anytime you can make it easier to develop larger worlds or more content, in a faster way, I think it just opens up a whole new avenue for a lot of creators, and I'm always excited to see that. And that matched with, what we're kind of seeing the move towards in UEFN, I think is really exciting. Like to get to a point where anyone can both, create some really awesome big experiences and also have a simple way of monetizing that. I think is super cool. I mean, to think about the new types of creators that we'll see come out of that, I think it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was fortunate to be a guest critic at Columbia last week or 2 weeks ago. So all the students had done these Unreal Engine projects. I was in the architecture school. And it was funny to see how many of those projects, because most of them were done in 5.0 or 5.1, to be like, oh, there's a thing that would really help you that just came out in 5.2. So, typically at the end of these architecture critiques, you're like trying to give the students like ideas for what they can do to take their project further. And I was surprised how many times I was like, you should download 5.2. Like there was a group that was doing all this amazing stuff with like iridescent pearlescent shaders and like all this crazy refraction, and I was like, have you seen like the opal material in the Rivian demo? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
What are you
like,
talking
add
about?
that
Yeah.
material in, that's going to do some crazy stuff here.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you say, like just the power that we're putting in the hands of students, creators, professionals, like anyone who just wants to dive into this sandbox to mix metaphors in a fun way.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. I mean, this is kind of segueing into a different topic, so we can hold off if we want. But when folks are comparing Unreal Engine and Unity, uh, I think there's kind of two sides to the argument when it comes to Unreal. And one is, oh, there's so many features. How could Unity compete? And other one's like, oh, it's too many features. And like I mean, you can argue whether or not it's everything and nothing. It doesn't really seem that way. I think for creators, and I think the proof is in the pudding in the sense of how widely it's being used in so many different domains. But yeah, I mean, the amount of tooling that's gonna, like, I've been I've, as we've been talking, I've had the release notes on my other screen. I've been trying to get through them, just scrolling, and I have not even reached halfway down the document now. It's just truly insane how much content is being, or how many features are being built out. The technical teams there, and how awesome their teams are right now, and what they're able to do in a release is really pretty incredible. No doubt about that.
Yeah, I'm just also scrolling through, and there's a ton.
Yeah,
there.
I think we'll be here for a while. Unfortunately, it's like, I mean, there's some really interesting stuff that I've kind of already found here. One, I found a new section here called Diff Tool. I never heard about. The current support for blueprint adjacent types. That's super interesting to me, because that leads into the kind of the management stuff that everyone's talking about in UEFN, where it's like source control. Having diff tools seems like it's kind of going in that direction, which is very cool to see. There's a whole section here on artificial intelligence, neural network engine. Like, what the fuck is that? I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this, but
you
so
didn't say the F word. You said,
yeah.
You said, what the fun is that? Yeah.
You can now run neural networks within your game using neural network engine plugin. Like, what? Since when? And apparently there's a course. That's pretty cool. But yeah, this is truly insane. The fact that you can go ahead and all of a sudden now you can run full simulations using neural networks. That's crazy. And that's just a random bullet point in this enormous document.
Yeah, I like the idea of us just shouting out a few random ones that are catching our eye, because some of these, like, I'm just looking at this for the first time too, and I guess there's a tool that apparently has been around since 5.1, but it's called the Render Capture Baking Tool. and it lets you take like a really simple piece of geometry and then make it look much more detailed just by baking a bunch of textures to it. And I imagine it's a little bit like the imposter baking tool as well, which would take like a bunch of angles of a 3D object and just do a PNG for each angle. So if you had things that are further away, it would still hold up pretty well. And this looks like a crazy version of that. Like the example they have is a really simple piece of geometry for a building. And then after you bake the textures to it, like it looks way more detailed. And then they show the same thing with a bunch of flowers. So whatever this thing is that I've never seen before this moment, that's something I want to play with.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I just scrolled to another random different part, and I'm seeing this is there's a line on here. I did actually know about this. I had heard about this, but SMP SMPTE man, I'm struggling here. 2110 support that allows you to do end display over Mellanox RiverMax, which means you can do uncompressed streams to displays directly out of GPUs, bypassing CPU encoding, which is really cool. Like that's crazy. And there's also a multi-process and off. This is one I didn't know. Multi-process and off-screen rendering, which sounds very interesting. Because that sounds like a really awesome way to run this, where you don't have to deal with Windows Display Manager and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, it's insane. And do you have another one? Have you hit another?
Yeah, so many, but it's kind of fun to be trying to figure out what these things are actually doing off the top of my head. Like there's a system now for when you're blending animations together, you can see like debug versions of each of those animations to help with the blending. And I was just looking at one that looked very cool with I just lost it. There's another one, but yeah, we can just go back and forth for a few real quick. Anything else for you?
Oh man, let's see. I'm just gonna. So I have found at the top of the page there's a nice index. Right. I have found just randomly clicking on that to be quite valuable in this. Virtual asset improvement, offline support. That's pretty cool. Virtual asset was what they introduced, if I remember clearly, to allow for check-in of individual. Actually, I don't know. I have no clue what virtual assets are. I guess I guess I don't know about that one. There's all the pixel streaming stuff here, which you have played around with, and we've spoken about before. OCIO improvements. That's always nice, man. And then it just goes into a huge list of bug fixes and improvements. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I want to call out Victor Broden's XR Creative Framework plugin, which he teased when we did our 3-hour live stream. So that's available in 5.2. It gives you just like a nice little toolkit of things on top of what the VR template gives you. Vive trackers now have their own plugin. I mean, and going back to what you were saying a minute ago, Jacob, about how Unreal Engine might have too many exciting things going on. I mean, that's why I really like the plugin system. Like you're unlikely to get distracted by things if the plugin for it isn't on. Like I heard a lot of people freaking out about Avalanche or whatever that will be called when it's released, which is almost like After Effects and all this motion graphics stuff added into Unreal, and a lot of people were like, oh my god, that's gonna make the UI completely overwhelming. And it's like, only if you turn it on. If you don't turn on that plugin, you're never gonna see it. So
I mean, Unreal has been very smart about that in their plugin ecosystem, that it's all pretty much in the same. I mean, the plugin list is getting enormous. Like it used to be you could know all the plugins that shipped with Unreal. Now there's just no chance you've played with all of them. But yeah, you're totally right. I mean, the UI never feels cluttered to me. I do one thing that can be frustrating is when you start doing something, and you spend a lot of time, and then of course, because that feature isn't presented to you by default, like, oh, there's a plugin for that. Why don't you just use that, right? Like, there's all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, there's been pretty constant improvements everywhere, I would say. I mean, I'm looking at Path Tracer right now. Path Tracer is a pretty interesting one. I have strong opinions on, I guess.
Yes.
But it looks like they're getting closer and closer to, fuller production support, ability to make objects invisible to camera rays, but not global illumination. That's a feature that I know a lot of the VFX guys have been asking for a long time. You could do AOVs. Yeah, you can render AOVs individually. AOV
What's an
is
AOV?
oh my god, what does it stand for? You gotta put me on the spot.
Oh, you don't have to give the actual acronym, but like
No,
basically, what is it?
I do though. This is like, man, it's embarrassing. AOV stands for arbitrary output variable. There it is. Essentially, what it is in VFX when you're rendering any sort of scene, typically what you'll do is you render your different passes as in what's called AOVs, and what that means is like you might render what's called a beauty pass, which is your final what looks like your fully lit, fully rendered scene and all that. And then you'll usually do additional passes that provide additional information for the rest of your pipeline. So one of the big ones is in VFX, if you're, for example, doing a VFX shot and you expect to hand over that shot to, let's say, a compositor who's going to take it and put it into footage or do something else with it, you typically want to render out other AOVs, like it could be transparency, or it could be puzzle mats, which allow you to do to very easily visually separate different elements, or like they're depth maps, right? All these are just essentially, you could think of them as separate render passes, but AOVs really just allow you to save out additional information along with your renders. And it's something that in VFX is super important, but it's very cool to see that's coming along with Path Tracer as well. It was a feature in Movie Render Queue, if I remember clearly, but not with Path Tracer. Think about like in Unreal when you're in your like lit preview, how you can go to all those other different views like that. You can kind of think of that as what an AOV is. Path Tracer blueprint node, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. We could be here all day talking about this.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to cover a few. Like, let's give ourselves like 5 more minutes and then a hard stop to move on to other things. But
Okay.
I'm excited to see Niagara sim caching. I remember when I first saw the chaos physics caching that made so much sense to me. The idea that you could have this crazy destruction, and rather than having to actually process and run that in real time every time it happens, you could store all that information and then basically just like play back a sequence anytime you need to call that. And now it looks like we have that with Niagara, where you could have some very complicated Niagara simulation, and then rather than running that at real time, you can cache it and play it back. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was one of the things that you used to be able to do similar caches for importing Houdini sims. I know a lot of people took advantage of that, but you couldn't build those caches with Niagara, if I remember clearly. Niagara was, I mean, honestly, I haven't touched it in a long time, but in the early days of Niagara, it was so exciting. But there were all sorts of features that were just in the background that no one had really documented yet. Things like physics field, or like force fields, not like force fields, but literally being able to arrange a series of world vector space so that you could have different like wind patterns, or have like specific patterns that your different forces played around. I mean, there's all sorts of really cool stuff that leaned into kind of what we're talking about, the caching, being able to calculate ahead of time. Now, I mean, I've seen so many. I think you brought up one of these folks last time we spoke on the podcast, who had done some really amazing VFX with Niagara and the grid panel. Was that part? I feel like I remember.
That rings a bell.
But using, for example, there's the grid 2D Niagara stage that I'm probably phrasing that wrong, but it used to be that you could, for example, like convert an image into a 2-dimensional grid of particles, but now you can actually render targets to the grid, which is incredible, because then you can do all sorts of amazing VFX. So very cool.
Yeah. There's a little GIF in here under dynamic mesh data interface. And it talks about how you can have a piece of geometry that's running, and then you can basically duplicate what's happening with that geometry and put it everywhere. So the example is like one little mannequin walking, and then you have like 1,000 mannequins below doing the same thing. And it looks a lot actually like a fun little Unreal Engine game I released for free a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you played it yet, but it's called Knock 'em Dead. And it's basically just a fun little physics sandbox where you are strategically trying to die at the correct time to get the most points. So you like run towards this crowd of all these other mannequins, and then you try to like go into ragdoll physics mode and knock down as many of the other mannequins as possible. And there's like a score multiplier based on that. Anyway, there's a little GIF that looks a lot like my little free game that anyone can download
I
and play
did
with.
see your game. I was seeing everyone's high scores and like what I think I was traveling at the time, so I was like, what is Alex doing? Like it was just like one of these threads where it's like I could see the smirk on your face as everyone was like rolling in with these results with just dead bodies all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, that looked like a lot of fun, to be honest.
And it's actually, funnily enough, the thing that I was playing with the most in there, I found out has gotten really popular in UEFN, which is the time dilation effect. So I made it so that as soon as ragdoll physics activate, we go from time dilation of 1, which it normally is, to 0.1. So it's like you get this very slow motion kind of thing as everything's going into ragdoll mode, then it goes back to normal. And apparently, like, for at least last time I saw this, all the most popular UEFN games were using time dilation in some fun ways, especially some of the racing games.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, that's a very popular theme in games in general, I guess, but it's more fun when you just turn it on and don't think about it, right?
Yeah. Oh, and you can also go the other way too. You can speed up time and suddenly like everything's going at like 50x speed.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You used to do one of those ragdoll physics as part of your courses, right? And like,
yeah, so it's actually a course by Alex Pascal, who's an awesome UE instructor, and so I teach some of his courses sometimes. And yes, he has like a runtime animation course that's state machines and blend states and composites, and as part of that, we also have like a blending between physics and some of the state machines that are for like idle, running, walking. So I after one particular class where we had a lot of time and the students were just coming up with some really fun ideas of what to do with it, when class ended, I just kind of kept going with it, and that resulted in the little game there.
Gotcha. I just ran across everything in ICVFX. Broadcast. There's some interesting stuff here. iOS Stage app. I hadn't heard about this.
Yeah. So I saw a little preview of this at South by Southwest. That's going to be really exciting. It's not out yet, but it should be soon.
There's now apparently multi-user receive only mode. That's pretty cool. So you can put someone where they just are viewing a multi-user session. That's really nice. Single editor multicam for pixel streaming, as we've said. That's a super cool one. Having the ability to have a camera operator in a completely different place, or like you could have all sorts of different people viewing a scene completely remotely. Really pretty cool. Here's an interesting one. So there is Render Grid was officially released with this version of the engine, and Render Grid is a bit of an interesting one. The company I work for, we actually were part of a solution that was built into Render Grid, and it was pretty cool to see. But it's essentially you can take MRQ or just like sequencer level sequences. Wow, levels. Man, I'm struggling tonight. We only record this at night, guys. All right. I feel like every podcast, I'm like, why can't I talk? And it's because it's like 10 o'clock and my bedtime at 9.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why. Anyways, you can take level sequences and kind of proceed, like use blueprint like graph to render them out in whatever procedural fashion you'd like. And that one's a pretty cool one. Yeah, I mean, all sorts of
something that is typically a pretty beefy course when we teach it, and also it made an appearance at Unreal Fest in 2022 is how silly and complex it is typically in Unreal to crossfade between two cameras. Like typically you would just do that in Premiere or something else later. But if you actually wanted to have like a Star Wars style wipe or a proper like fade in, fade out crossfade between two cameras, you'd have to do this ridiculous system where you'd have like cameras on render targets. And then those render targets are actually being looked at by like other cameras. And then within that, there's a material that is using material parameter collections to like dither and do all that kind of stuff. And I just want to point out that I do see in the notes here that crossfading is now supported with the Media Plate Actor, which I think we brought up before. Media Plate Actor is a great new replacement for most of the way movies were brought into Unreal in the past. Now it's very drag and drop. You don't need these like 5 other accompanying assets. And very nice to see that that is just a thing now. You can crossfade between Media Plate Actors. Hooray.
So, but between cameras, you're still stuck.
Let me see. There's not a huge explanation. It just says the Media Plate Actor can now create crossfading between media using a combination of multiple media players, crossfade up to 2x tracks.
Because the media players are just the like if you have pre-recorded footage. I feel like for crossfading 2 cameras, it's probably still pretty tricky. Yeah, you got me thinking about how I would do that, but I don't know if I would have a better solution than what you just mentioned. I mean, just throwing it on. And
now you got me wondering too if there's any way you could actually not trick Unreal Engine because it's all within its own language, but have Unreal Engine read a camera feed from in-engine as a media player. I have no idea if there's actually a way to do that. But
I mean, you could do it. Yeah. You definitely can. I mean, in theory, you can actually technically do a loop back with pixel streaming and encode it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It would be pretty stupid, but you could do it. But I'm trying to think how you would do that without getting into the engine. Yeah, now you really got me thinking about it. I get the feeling what you would probably have to do is something similar with render targets and figure out how to capture. I don't have a better solution.
Yeah. So yeah, nothing else major I want to mention in the release notes other than you already alluded to it, but a very nice section about all the new pixel streaming things going on. I noticed for VR pixel streaming, they are not using the term WebXR. I heard some back and forth about whether or not to call it WebXR because it is using some WebXR libraries, but I know Victor was kind of uncomfortable with that being the actual term that was being bandied about. So it does say VR pixel streaming, and it mentions everything needed to get that up and running. I allude to it in a couple of my little tutorial videos. And then also right under that, the multi-streamer support, where now you can have technically as many cameras as you want inside one instance of Unreal, all streaming out to different browsers. And that's cool for all sorts of different reasons across virtual production and ICVFX and potentially co-op gaming. Oh, and speaking of gaming, I just make sure that I cover Prey Dog's VR mod in this.
Oh yeah. No, I think we spoke briefly about that even, but we should go. I noticed you had been chatting about it a little more online. I'd love to go back into it. Before we get off the topic of pixel streaming, though, I do actually have not 5.2 but 5.3 very interesting feature to share with you, and this comes courtesy of Adam Wren, or from our friends at TensorWorks. But he sent me the commit in 5.3 where officially Vulkan reaches SM6, meaning there's now feature parity in the render hardware interface on Linux and Windows.
What? Oh, that's a big amazing
one.
Yeah, we've been waiting for that for a while.
It's a pretty exciting thing for nerds like us, but with pixel streaming, it's very cool. And when we're seeing all this stuff about, for example, SMPTE 2110 and off-screen rendering for in-camera VFX and everything going on with pixel streaming and deployment, all this stuff, being able to have render parity between Vulkan and DirectX 12 is huge, and it's coming out 5.3. The commits are there. It's in the engine.
Eitan, who has been doing some really fun experiments with Unreal Engine running on Linux, and certainly that's going to make it even cooler. So can't wait to try that out.
I mean, it's gonna be really sweet when you don't have to think about. I mean, in theory, that's the whole point of the RHI in Unreal Engine, the render hardware interface, is that you shouldn't have to think about the different underlying protocols, like,
Yeah.
or APIs. You shouldn't have to make a conscious decision when it comes to visual fidelity. At least, like, there's performance trade-offs, and there's obviously more in-depth optimization that needs to happen for some of these things. But in terms of visual quality, you should not have to think between DirectX 12 and Vulkan. All the features should operate identically. And for a long time now, it's been Vulkan has had subpar feature support compared to DirectX, and it's been a big problem because when we're talking about deployments outside of games, so like for lots of industries, VFX and you know media and all sorts of deployments, the folks who use it for simulation or world building or digital twin, all this stuff, right? Being able to deploy it outside of the Windows environment is huge. And now having parity between the platforms, that's really going to make a big difference.
Yeah, 100%. Cool.
I was very
What's
excited
next
to receive that message. That's for sure. I want to chat. One thing that we talked about a little earlier that I think is worth going back over is talking about what happened with Unity this week. Actually,
Okay.
it was part of this conversation. So I mentioned earlier, I saw lots of very interesting takes online as a result of Unity laying off a very good portion of their engineering staff this week. And to folks out there who maybe are coming from Unity or were laid off, and I apologize. I feel bad for you guys and everything that's happened. That was definitely a bad situation. Anytime one of these mass layoffs happens, it's a terrible situation. With people, a lot of people who are very passionate and very talented. It's always hard to see, but I'm confident they'll all find a new home, and most likely they'll just end up at Unreal. And you know what? That's not the worst place to be. So regardless, so there was a lot of news. They laid off a huge amount of their engineering staff, and there were a lot of conversations online about how Unity fit into the space today with Unreal Engine. And particularly there were a bunch of folks talking about, okay, where does this sit between Unreal Engine and Godot, which is not really a conversation that was happening a while back. Because I don't know about you, but let's say 4 or 5 years ago, Unity was pretty much de facto standard, especially in indie games. For it was a de facto standard for lots of let's call them small, medium sized studios. Then the larger studios all used their own custom engines. Unity was for everyone else, and then Unreal Engine was this like weird kid that like some people like, but like, what are blueprints? Like, what the fuck is that? It was that kind of thing. And nowadays, it's very different. The Fortnite money is good money, and so they've poured a ton of resources into the engine. They've acquired an absolutely incredible technical team. And they've just been knocking features out left and right. And now there's a conversation about Unity, like, okay, well, now that Unreal can both meet the demands of small to medium sized studios, it's free licensing for small to medium sized studios most of the time, and it can also work in AAA games and all these industries. Like, where's the room left for a solution like Unity, which has its own licensing and needs to kind of scramble to find the industries that it's going to fit best into, right? I think that's an interesting conversation. I mean, because on the other end, you do have something like Godot, which historically has not been very fully featured, but there's been a lot of really interesting development happening there. And so now there's a free alternative on the other side that's kind of putting pressure on the indie game space, and smaller studios that don't want to who want to be able to hack at the engine more, or whatever it is, right? Like, I think it does put everyone in terms of Unity and some of these other guys in a very interesting position. But I'm curious to hear your take if you've thought about this.
Yeah, a little bit. And I always feel like anytime we talk about Godot, I need to say so many people are waiting for Godot and to see
Yeah, yeah,
what it can be in the future.
of course.
Yeah, and I mean, what's been interesting to me as well is thinking about Unity's acquisitions lately, and I think we've mentioned these before, but like, you know, seemingly in response to like everything with metahumans and cubic motion and 3 lateral, Unity got Ziva Dynamics, who has some really exciting digital human stuff, as well as Weta Digital. And so I was curious if anything had really come of that. Like I remember at GDC last year, you and I together might have even seen some like lion demo that Unity was showing, and then there was a woman at a table, which was also an exciting demo. But those felt very much like very unapproachable, not particularly artist-friendly tech demos. And I was curious if any of that had been made easier for people to build into their pipelines. And I actually did get a response on Twitter just to the question, like, what's the state of this right now? And I just want to draw people's attention to the response if I can find it, which is basically that, yes, some of these tools are being baked in a more user-friendly way into what they're doing. Ziva has VFX 2.1, which apparently is very artist-friendly. That's their software. And then also there was one more on the Weta side. Cinemachine 3. Cinemachine 3 has new improvements that come from Ziva and also Weta. So anyways, just wanted to point that out, that it's good to at least see Unity starting to bring more tools available to people with those acquisitions. I do have to say that in my humble opinion, I feel like Unity's being driven a lot by being a public company now and, you know, their share price. And fortunately, Unreal Engine still being a private company, or Epic Games rather, it just seems like there isn't as much pressure for short-term profit, which is, I don't know, that feels better to me.
I think what I mean, we've touched on this a bunch. Like what makes this situation a lot easier for Epic is that they have a game to ship these features in when they build them, right?
Yeah.
So like when they build a new feature for the engine, they're going to build it for either Fortnite or for a specific partner or licensee, right? Like they have those people lined up. They don't have to, you know, play things out on a limb for their investors or for anyone else. Like it's very straightforward, the value and return that they get from implementing any feature, right? Whereas for Unity, because they've, you know, they haven't necessarily gone down that path of giving themselves a brand tied to a specific experience or type of experience. You know, I think it's a lot more challenging for them to justify going out and building some of these I mean, like I said, like running a neural net just as a plugin, and like that's a really weird thing to develop if you are building a game engine. Like make things look better first, but they don't have to think about that because, you know, they have VFX customers, or, you know, maybe games customers who specifically want this feature. They're already licensees and they'll ship it in, you know, Fortnite in a few seasons and it's done, right? Like it's paid for. I think that's I sympathize with Unity. You know, as a brand, they've had a pretty incredible role in shaping this industry, and I don't think the story's by any means over yet. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff still to come there. You know, if like Alex was saying with some of their acquisitions, you know, the Weta Tools kind of and pipeline team, you know, acquiring, you know, trying to stay competitive with their acquisitions, I think is interesting. But I get the feeling that, you know, someone like a company like Unity is bound to have an ace up their sleeve somewhere. And kind of where they choose to play their cards, I think will be very interesting coming up. I do think there's plenty of space left for them. I don't think it's fair to say, oh, well, between Unity and Godot, there's nothing left. Like I don't really think that's accurate. Because there are plenty of people who, you know, don't see Unreal for, or I mean, I said this earlier, I saw half of the discourse on that was like, oh, Unreal Engine is just bloatware. It's, you know, it has way too many features and like they're just throwing features out there and no one's going to use them. Well, it's like, I don't know if that's true, but like if you're Unity, you could certainly play that. Like you could play into that and make your experience very, tailored and specific to a very specific industry. Like, you could do that. So it'll be interesting to see,
Yeah, for sure. All right, next topic.
You tell me, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's still fresh in my head thinking about the gaming stuff, but boy, this past week or so, I've really gone hard into this early beta access I have to Prey Dog, as he's known on Discord, his universal Unreal Engine VR injector. And I didn't realize that he has a long history of creating VR injectors for lots of games made from other engines. I was showing my 7-year-old who loves dinosaurs and monsters, Monster Hunter inside VR, which is not an Unreal Engine game, but it used to be that he'd make all these like one-off injectors, and each one was tailored to a specific game. But now what he's working on, and I think he plans on releasing this to the public in the next couple months, is basically this one universal injector that'll work with any Unreal Engine game. And so far, it's been working awesome. I've tried it with It Takes Two. I've tried it with Harry Potter. I've tried it with all sorts of different games, a bunch of small indie games made in Unreal Engine, and they feel excellent. Oh, I tried it with Jedi Survivor, which also, if you turn that into like a first person game, like you zoom in the camera really close and now everything feels more first person. Really, really cool. And what I'm particularly impressed by is, like, as someone who has spent a fair amount of time taking my older like Unreal Engine projects and trying to convert them to run well in VR. His interface just has all these different like CVARs and, the way that the VR was being created that just automates a lot of that process. So what I found, embarrassingly, I can admit that in some cases I could take an older project that I made that I had manually converted to VR, and instead I just use his injector on my original version of that project, and it runs smoother and looks better. And it's like, man, like that makes me feel embarrassed, but also it's super cool that it's doing that. Because yeah, you don't just have to do it for games. You can do it for Unreal Engine sample projects. You can take things like the Meerkat demo or the Matrix City sample and just take the downloaded executable of that and now inject VR into it. And it handles Lumen and Nanite stuff well. It handles things like grooms, which sometimes would only show up in one eye very well. And I should say also, I think I can say this is okay. There is another Unreal Engine 5.2 sample that is coming out next week. I won't say anything more than that, but I also had early access to this sample, not made for VR. I checked it out with this injector. Gorgeous, amazing. And I can't wait for everyone to check this out next week. So just a little teaser of we now have the ML deformer sample that came out right away with 5.2. Another 5.2 sample is on the way that I can't wait to see everyone's reaction to.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I that sounds pretty awesome. And I remember all of the early, maybe it was the same person who did like injectors for, well, there was a project that tried to do it for any game, and I remember getting very nauseous early on. But like I remember some of the early like Skyrim mods, and BioShock, and trying to think.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of efforts on that front.
Yeah, I mean, Skyrim was the big one, if I remember clearly, that was developed, and I remember trying it and also getting extremely nauseous. But I have to imagine a lot has changed since then. I'd love to give that a try. I mean, it sounds like a really awesome reason to get my headset off the wall and jump into some games and see them again. And I mean, Harry Potter sounds pretty cool, and it's not the most beautiful game ever, but it sounds pretty cool to like, can you actually like swing your wand around and do stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the game, but in VR. And again, you could like zoom in closer if you want to get out of that like third person mode, but to like fly around, Hogwarts and the water looks beautiful, to go inside the castle and really get a sense of like the scale of the Great Hall in VR. That stuff is pretty cool. And I also have to mention, because I usually am not a fan of Discord, that this is all living inside the Flat 2 VR Discord, and it's a very well organized Discord because there's certain threads or channels that are about just like general tips and tricks and that kind of stuff. And then you can also find, like, for every single game that someone has gotten working in a converter, either this universal Unreal Engine one or others, there's just like all sorts of information there about like getting set up and best practices for like what to do your settings at. I also was introduced to something that I can't believe I didn't know about, which is the universal Unreal Engine geez, it's UUU, but it basically, this is another injector which will allow you to take games from Unreal or any executable that was built as a shipping version. So of course, in a shipping version of something made in Unreal, you don't have access to the console anymore. This will give you the console back, which is really cool. So then for games or anything else, you now can use all those CVARs under the sky, and that's awesome for trying to like modify a thing to be exactly the way you want it to be.
That sounds like a great way to get some instant cheats in your game,
Yeah.
right?
Well, playing it, so It Takes Two is a co-op game, and it was very interesting how typically it's like a split screen game, and they added in this split screen feature at my nudging of being like, hey, like this would be an awesome game to have in there. And right now it just doesn't work well in VR because of the split screen side, but it's a very different experience when you have like a full view of the level, because normally having half the screen and having that frustrum very tailored to what the game is trying to show you at a particular moment, it definitely feels like cheating having the full VR view of everything.
Right, because there's a lot of just like narrative driven moments where the camera is fixed, right? I remember that. I played that game. It was a little creepy, but I enjoyed it.
I mean, it's a great puzzle game. Just like there's a lot of really cleverly designed puzzles in there, and I have to applaud the Electronic Arts team for never resting on a certain mechanic. Like there's some wonderful mechanics in that game that could just be it could be, sorry, a whole game, and instead it's there for like 5 minutes and then you're on to the next mechanic. And so it just feels like there's so many great ideas packed in there.
It's true. And just a heads up, your video is frozen for
oh, thank you.
audio
It's
listeners.
probably a battery thing. Yep, it's telling me I got low battery.
There you go.
Is that better? Great.
Yep.
I'm back. Hi.
You're back. You're back.
And as long as we're talking about games, let me just give a quick shout out to another Fisherman's Tale by Interspace VR. They are a wonderful studio that I've had a nice relationship with. The guy who leads the studio is named Balthazar, which is one of the coolest names in the world. And my kids started playing the first Fisherman's Tale game when they were very young. So my oldest, who's now 7, must have been 4 or 5, and the youngest was like 2. And again, I've always been the kind of person who like wants to let my kids have like very curated time in VR that is supervised, and it's all very designed, and they love that game. And I think they learned so much spatial reasoning from that game, and they probably played through the whole thing like 50 times. So when Balthazar emailed me about a month ago and was like, hey, do you guys want early access to the game? The kids were like, their minds were blown. And so they've had all this time to get a sense of the game early. And then yesterday, my 5-year-old came home from school, and I thought like, I told him like, oh, by the way, just so you know, another Fisherman's Tale officially came out today. And he's like, oh, well, we should make a video about it. And I was like, well, we don't usually do like screen time during the week. But he's like, but what if people get stuck? Like, we have all this information about it, so we should make like a nice video that shows people how to play through all the hard parts. And I was like, oh, I mean, that is very nice and generous of you. So we made this video last night that ended up being like an hour and a half long of him. It's very cute, just going through like the first 2.5 chapters and solving most of the puzzles on his own. There were some there that I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to like swap in and help him out. And some of these really tricky puzzles where you need to like throw your head into a vent and put your hand into an engine and like control these things from different angles, like he took care of it. He did it himself.
That's pretty cool.
It's a really cool game, and I love the way that it expands on the first game, because now they really expand on the idea of you being a fisherman, because your head and your hands, all of these body parts now become something that you like cast out and then kind of reel back in a different capacity. And it's really a game made for VR. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I remember loving the first one. It was one of those games that you just had to play all the way through, like you could, and it was a pretty long experience. I remember clearly. The playtime was like 3 to 4 hours or something like that for the first one. If I remember clearly, it might have been a little shorter, but I remember, that was a great game, and I definitely got to play a new one. I think of kind of that initial generation of games, it was that, and like I guess similar to what you're describing with some of these puzzles. Maybe in this version, but I Expect You to Die was another one of my favorites. It's just those games where puzzle games in VR are just awesome. I guess I have no other way of putting that. but puzzle games that can pack a narrative punch too are even better.
Yeah, 100%.
And that is an Unreal Engine game, right?
Yep. Both these Fisherman Tale games. I mean, it's pretty rare to find an Oculus Quest totally standalone game that runs in Unreal. Their last game, Mask Maker, which was another super cool game, was made in Unreal, but I think only worked on desktop, not just Quest. And so it's pretty cool to see a company that is still devoted to Unreal Engine and making totally standalone games, because a lot of people seem to be convinced that Unreal Engine can't be used for that, and they're wrong.
Of course. Oh man. Well, I think we have run the gamut in this episode.
I got a few more quick things. Like, I think we need to shout out that Unreal Fest 2023 was officially announced. It'll be at the beginning of October, back in New Orleans again. Are you going to be there, Jacob?
I will definitely be there.
Excellent.
Definitely be in New Orleans. I'm excited. I had a great time last year. Definitely recommend you come down to New Orleans if you're interested. It's an awesome event with some great people. Yeah, can't recommend it enough.
I think I'll be giving a talk about MetaHuman Animator, which will be really fun, and I'll try to squeeze in some VR stuff for that as well. So potentially look forward to that talk.
Yeah, we were brainstorming doing a talk this year as well.
That'd be great.
I'm not sure exactly what it will be yet, but I would love to do something there, even if it's in a small way.
Yeah. I also just want to shout out briefly that a cool thing that came out with 5.2 is there is now a Lumen performance guide for Unreal Engine, which is very robust. And I just like the way it kind of goes through like getting the most out of Lumen. And this is stuff like all this information was out there across like different live streams and forum posts, but it's a really good one-stop shop for understanding more about Lumen. And I'll try to put links, or Alan will try to put as many links as possible in our show notes for this stuff.
Yeah, I'm checking that out now. I actually haven't seen this. It's pretty cool. So now that you've gone, maybe this is a longer topic, and we can expand this maybe in the next episode if you want to come by. But now that you've had enough time to really, mess with Lumen, what is your thoughts on it? Like, do you still have any desires, any unfulfilled needs?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, it still is too unpredictable. And again, this is something that might be clarified by spending more time going through this guide, but I still find situations where I cannot get a certain corner of the wall to resolve, and it's still almost doing like a caustic, gloomy, effect, and I find that really distracting. Reflections have gotten better, but they're still not suitable for mirror reflections. So, most of especially the VR projects that we're involved with right now, we're still using baked lighting and ray tracing. And I would love to leave that behind and go into a fully, real-time unbaked world. But at least insofar as what I've been able to achieve with Lumen so far, I haven't quite been able to take that leap yet. Nanite, though, is great. We're using Nanite all sorts of times and places.
Yeah, no doubt. I haven't heard any middle ground takes on Nanite. I think pretty much everyone loves it. There's pretty much no looking back on that one. Yeah, so cool.
Yeah. Do you have any shout outs, Jacob?
I do, but man, I for some reason closed out of Twitter before we got to this point. Do you have a few you can lead with, and I'll jump?
Yeah, I've got two quick ones, and they're kind of similar and related. First, I want to shout out a Twitter user at Teflon Sega, and I think his YouTube account is the same. And he is a musical artist who is doing really cool virtual production stuff. So today he posted a music video he made, and it's a single take of him in a mocap suit with like a treadmill and doing the entire music video in one take. And then, you see the final version created in Unreal. And I just love the innovation of what's going on. And what's cool is like, he's doing so many kind of random things in that one take that he couldn't possibly have known, like, to hop from here to here to here to here, because that's where he knew he was going to have rocks. So of course, a lot of that stuff happens in post, but it's a beautiful production pipeline. And I love seeing that kind of stuff. Similarly, a shout out to an OG person who's been doing that for a long time, Corey Strausberger, who also has Blue and the Xanadu stuff on YouTube. I heard him on a great podcast On CG Pro, I have a nice relationship with CG Pro. I've taught a few classes for them, including for NASA earlier in the year. Went on their podcast as well, and really excellent interview with Corey about everything he's up to now. And particularly from a business perspective, for anyone who's thinking about a career in like VTubing or doing, one-man army kind of productions inside Unreal, Corey gives a really good breakdown of what his challenges have been, making that something that he can actually survive on, and also, at least in his case, finding a really exciting haven with a DAO, where there's a lot of basically Corey's message to everyone in that podcast is like, there actually is a lot of money for this kind of stuff floating out there. You just need to find your right community and present them your ideas, and people actually will fund it. So if you go to Corey's YouTube channel for Xanadu, you'll see nothing's been posted there in a while, but it's because he's like deep in the weeds doing some pretty heavy production for the next episodes. And the last thing he posted was actually the pitch video to the DAO. And this isn't even in the YouTube channel, where as his avatar, as his character, he is making the case for why they should give him money to do his show. So very inspiring story there. So check that interview out on the CG Pro podcast.
Yeah, very cool. I did remember one of my shout outs. We've shouted them out before, but the folks over at Skyglass and Ryan in particular, they launched their application a few weeks ago. I think we mentioned it after GDC, but it's been really cool to see. They've had a lot of folks checking it out. There was a few really awesome threads I saw of people doing, kind of on the spot virtual production and kind of talking through, hey, like this seems really cool. Like, what can it do? And kind of exploring these kinds of solutions. So I think it's really cool. And shout out to them for a successful launch. That's always great to see in the community of folks who are kind of playing in this middle ground between Unreal Engine and these other industries. And I don't know, it's very cool to see.
Yeah, 100%.
I definitely had at least one more shout out, but I lost it. So
that's okay.
It'll be in the comment section if I remember at some point. But shout out to, I guess, the whole Unreal Engine community.
Yeah,
it's so exciting to see what's going on. I'm excited to see you in New Orleans now that that's announced. And I was telling Alex this at the beginning of the podcast, but maybe in Australia, we'll see. There's Australian Unreal Fest, but that's like a 20-something hour flight. So I don't know.
Yeah. But it is in their winter, so it might not be too hot. I don't know. I think it's in Sydney, right?
It's in Gold Coast, so it's like
Gold Coast. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess it's in June, so yeah, winter, right?
Cool.
But I'm sure it's still perfectly lovely. I was told the water parks were great, so
sure.
Better be warm. Better be warm.
Yeah. My brother studied abroad in the Gold Coast. He had an absolute joy of a time. I've never been. I've been to the entire East Coast back when I was like 14 years old as a wee student ambassador, but I've only explored that East Coast, have never gone inland properly.
Yeah. I've gone to visit Australia once, and it was great. I loved it. I would love to go back. It's just, man, what a brutal flight. It's a lot of traveling. That's for sure.
Cool.
All right.
So it's been really nice to run into the occasional person who says they're a fan of the podcast. So I definitely want to give people the opportunity to do that. So just reiterating a couple events coming up that I'd love to see people at. On Monday and Tuesday, I'll be speaking at the Real-Time Economics Summit in New York City. It's a big gathering of decision makers who want to use real-time technology in interesting ways. And I'll be talking about the architectural design process on Monday. And then on Tuesday, I'll be talking about this crazy project I've been doing in Austin since December. That is a arena scale VR multiplayer ray traced Unreal Engine VR experience. And I'll be going through just some of the lessons from that so far. And I'll actually have a little bit of a demo of how that runs. We'll do like a little, because that experience has like OptiTrack in a big 100-foot by 100-foot space. We'll have a little bit of a taster version of that at the Museum of the Moving Image. And then on May 23rd, my dad's birthday, I will be on a panel at, I have no idea how to pronounce this, GMetrixR, GMETRIXR's first in real life event. It'll be at Hudson Yards in New York City, and that'll be a cool panel talking about the metaverse and XR and AI and all these fun future buzzwords that we like to talk about so much. Then I'll be heading back to Austin on May 31st, doing actually some fun stuff with some Epic guys there, which I might be able to talk about next podcast. And then on June 1st, I'll be headed over to Los Angeles for a few days, partially for the Next Stage Summit, which is all about theater and live events. And we'll be showing some cool Unreal Engine stuff there. That's it for me.
That's a lot. That's not just it. That's a lot. But definitely, if you're at some of those events, or if you make Unreal Fest later in the year, I'm sure we'll have many episodes between now and then. But definitely feel free to reach out and let us know you listen to the podcast and give us feedback. We really love to hear it. And with that, I'll say, make sure you like, make sure you comment, subscribe, share, whatever it is, wherever you are. And thanks for listening. I hope we catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.